Okay guys, welcome to part 3, the last part of my presentation on nonviolent movements in the military. Part 1 was focused on how nonviolent movements should engage with the military. Part 2 was how the military should engage with nonviolent movements. And now part 3 is the role of nonviolent movements in disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration, or DDR. This is an often overlooked responsibility of nonviolent movements. So any discussion on nonviolent movements and the military should include this. So here we go. Here's just a quick overview of DDR. These are UN definitions that you guys could read over if you want, but the important kind of thing to understand here is this is a 3-step process. DDR is. First step is removing weapons from the hands of combatants. Second step is taking the combatants out of military structures, so defections, which is what we're going to talk about, and then integrating combatants socially and economically into society, which is the last step, but definitely not the least step, and is often overlooked across all societies. And the objective of the DDR process is to contribute to security and stability in post-conflict environments. That's the goal of it, but what focusing on post-conflict does DDR a disservice, because this could happen or should happen throughout the stages of a conflict, so during a conflict as well. And what it does is it can help create an enabling environment for peace processes and for dealing with security issues and security problems, and dealing with maybe a poor relationship between the civil-military relationship could be strained. So focusing on DDR can help improve those relationships, which inevitably leads to a more sustainable peace. So the first step here for nonviolent movements is to understand the military as a pillar of support for the government, or if it's a lower scale nonviolent movement, to understand the military's role as a pillar of support for the status quo in general. Not necessarily if you're not trying to overthrow a regime or overthrow a dictator, things like that. It could still be a tool for the status quo. So understanding that, along with the other pillars of support, things like the economy, things like media, things like bureaucracy, the military is a crucial point of it. So understanding that you want to chip away at that nonviolent movements want to chip away at that military pillar to kind of encourage and bring upon change. So we've come to the conclusion, or now we understand, that defections are crucial. So encouraging or finding a way to get members of the military to leave that position is probably the most effective way of chipping away at that pillar of support. If the military is losing its members, especially influential members, especially powerful people in the military, it's going to suffer. So that's a goal, but often overlooked is what happens after the defections, and this is most recently seen in the case of Syria, which during the Arab uprisings, Syria had a slew of defections from the military. This was because of Assad ordering the military to do things and commit war crimes, and they started to push back. So there were a lot of defections for a variety of reasons, some of which some military members were tired of firing upon their own citizens, but others were vying for power in a potential new government, which may be the case, but defections nonetheless. But Syria really failed, and the nonviolent uprising in Syria really failed at what to do after these defections, and that led to the transition from a nonviolent movement to a violent one, or it helped lead to it at least. So what happens next? Step 1 is to prevent arms from entering the operations and logistics of a nonviolent movement. So this could be as basic as having a plan for what a soldier does with his weapon when he leaves the military. A lot of times he'll take it with him, and then just it's a part of his life. It's a third arm for him. So nonviolent movements should be cognizant of that and should understand, just from a basic standpoint, keep that thing away, keep that weapon away. So operationally, don't allow it in, but logistically, for planning, don't let when nonviolent movements are strategizing, don't let the fact that weapons are now available become part of your planning. Nonviolent movements, out of necessity or out of sure sustainability, can't use weapons. Sometimes it's because they don't have them. So nonviolent movements arise and emerge as nonviolent because they don't have access to weapons. But for them to succeed, they have to keep those weapons out and they have to stay unarmed. So that's step one. Step two is to find purposeful and meaningful roles for former military members. This is a less concrete, a little bit more abstract step, meaning nonviolent movements often have a formed and organized leadership already, but the military defectors, especially ones who have come from command positions, from extremely influential positions, aren't really going to have much of a desire to just be an everyday activist or an everyday participant in this nonviolent movement. They want to be involved heavily. They've made a very difficult decision to leave the military to join this movement, and in an important position or a lot of say, the ability to kind of make decisions is something that's going to be on the forefront of their mind when they decide to join the movement. So movements should have a system in place for finding meaningful roles for former military members, so they do feel engaged. They do feel that same level of integrity and duty and honor and things like that they had when they were in the military. Sense of purpose is often the highest basic need of a member of the military, and that needs to be replicated in a nonviolent movement. And lastly, step three is finding avenues for redress for military members who feel a need for justice and revenge. This was also another thing seen in the case of Syria, was members of the military who had been ordered by Assad to do horrific things and saw other members of the military firing upon citizens that they knew, brothers and sisters, friends, members of the community that they had come across before the war had started, before the conflict had started, and they were angry and frustrated, and they wanted revenge and they wanted justice. So often the only avenue for that, especially in the case of a failed state or a widespread conflict, is to enact justice on their own, often in violent ways. And this is a crucial part of reintegration, is finding a way for military members or military defectors to feel a sense of justice and to feel that they are getting revenge in a long-term strategic way, as opposed to enacting revenge, violent revenge immediately. So this is probably the most complicated step of the DDR process. Justice is something that is not easily achieved, and nonviolent movements should be cognizant of that and understanding that it is their responsibility when receiving defectors to have avenues for redress for them. Okay, guys, well, thank you. That concludes this part of the presentation and the presentation overall on nonviolent movements in the military. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out on any of the parts. The three parts were broken down for a reason, and that is that they're kind of meant for different audiences. So if you have any questions on any specific part or the topic as a whole, this is an often overlooked topic or an overlooked interest in how to connect nonviolent movements in the military and understanding the dynamics between the two. So if you have any questions, let me know. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and thanks so much.